Hello there and welcome to the Secrets of Organ Playing podcast. I'm your host, Vidas Pinkevičius. Today's guest is John Boody from Taylor Boody Organbuilders. He is originally from Wakefield, Massachusetts, and graduated from University of Maine with a Bachelor of Arts in Music. He apprenticed with Fritz Noack from 1966 to 1968, then served in the U.S. Army from 1968 to 1970, during which he spent 13 months in Vietnam. In 1970, he apprenticed with Fritz Noack again, and then with John Brombaugh in Germantown, Ohio, from 1971 to 1977. In 1977, John Brombaugh moved his shop to Eugene, Oregon, and John Boody and George Taylor founded Taylor Boody Organbuilders. He moved to Staunton in 1979, where he lives with his wife, Janet. Aside from organ building, he enjoys cross-country skiing, biking, gardening, and singing with the choir at Trinity Episcopal Church in Staunton. John and Janet have 2 children and 3 grandchildren. In this conversation, John and I talk about his creative career in organ building, especially in historically oriented organ building, his interests with North German style organs, and what he learned over the years. And he even shares his vision for the future of the organ building too. So if you are interested in knowing what's around the corner in our profession, especially when it comes to building instruments, I think you will be delighted to listen to this conversation. Let's go to the show. Thank you so much, John, for joining this conversation. I'm so delighted finally to talk to you about your long career in fantastic organ building, and of course your organs, and they are well known in entire world, and especially for lovers of historically minded organ building techniques, right? So thank you so much for your time and generosity, and welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Do you remember, John, the time when you first fell in love with the organ when you were little? Can you share us the story?
I went to a Baptist church in Massachusetts, in New England, and in that church was E and G Hook and Hastings organ that was built in 1860.
Right.
And I was singing in the junior choir, and every year the choir director, as a prize for the good behavior of the choir, took us into the organ and through the organ. And I always remember that time of going in and seeing the great pipes of the double open wood. And it was an amazing thing. We could see the bellows, we could see the metal pipes, we could see the tracker action, and I thought that was a wonderful thing.
So, as I understand, you were fascinated by the complexity with the instrument itself, right? Rather than the music, rather than the sound. Am I right?
I think it was both, because I remember at the end of church, when the other choir children would go away, I would go up and sit on the organ bench with the organist and pull stops and turn the pages and enjoy the sound of the organ. So I think it was both.
Right. Were you interested in learning more about playing the instrument, or more about how it is constructed and how you can later maybe build some of the things yourself?
I think it was more about the music. I played the organ a little bit, but I was never well coordinated on the keyboard. And my life has been spent in music, but more as a choir singer and a soloist. So music has been my life, but not organ playing.
And of course, we have to be grateful to people who first introduced to us this magnificent instrument, right? If it weren't for them, maybe our lives might have been different, don't you think?
Oh, yes. And the other thing, my other experience in my early life was in the summertime, I sang in a choir that was up in New Hampshire. It was for a church that was closed all winter, and we opened the church in the summertime. And there was a small pipe organ in there, and every year we had to clean out all the nuts and all the berries and things that the squirrels put in the organ. So we had to take out all the pipes and vacuum the top of the organ and clean out everything. So the organist knew I was interested in the pipe organ, so he let me come and help him do that, and I remember that very clearly.
And what happened later, John? How did you really develop this idea into going into this profession of organ building, basically making it into your career, a long life career, right? Lifelong.
It's the only thing I've ever done in my whole life. I went to the University of Maine in Orono, Maine, and when I went to the University of Maine, I thought I was already interested in woodworking and working with my hands, and I thought if I went into the school and studied forestry, that would be a good thing, wood technology. So I spent the first year in wood technology, but at the time I had collected a lot of recordings of organ music, like E. Power Biggs. He published a recording called The Organ, which had recordings of many of the old European organs. And so I already had a lot of recordings, and I became interested in the radio station at the University of Maine. And it was a very small radio station. I think we had 40 watts of power, so it was very low power. And nobody there knew anything about classical music, so I became the broadcaster of classical music. And I made a program called Organ Masterpieces. And 1 hour every week, I played organ music and talked about the organs to the people in our listening audience. So I started collecting more and more recordings. It was there were a number of European organists who were very, very good at the time. Helmut Walsche, of course, and René Sauergen, the French organist. There were just a whole number of those people that I had those recordings. And I became more and more interested in the organ at that time. And, back then when you had a record, a vinyl record, you had a big book that went with it. And very often they had the whole specification of the organ, and they had drawings of the organs and how the mechanical action worked and the history, how many times the organ had been restored and who did those restorations. So I learned a lot about the European organ culture at the time. And at the same time, in the rural parts of Maine, and Maine is quite a rural state, there were many small churches at that time that were throwing away their pipe organs and buying electronic organs. And I was given several organs at that time to take out. So I got my hands on the pipes, on the organs, and I successfully took organs apart and moved them. And I even bought myself a little truck so that I could load the organs up and take them to new places.
Wow, that was a tremendous service you did back then. Not only with those moving organ parts, right? But with organ radio broadcasts, right? And it was probably before anything. Before internet, right? Before pipe dreams, right? It was pioneering idea, I would say, John, and a lot of organists probably enjoyed your broadcasts back then. How long did it go on air?
It was about 2 years. So my third and my fourth year at the university. Mm-hmm. And at the same time there was an active organ building scene and organ culture around the Boston, Massachusetts area. And, of course, Charles Fisk was there, and Fritz Noack. Fritz Noack was trained in the Baccarat shop in Hamburg. And so I looked for those builders, and I applied for work. So 2 summers, I worked with Fritz Noack in his workshop. So that was my first real training in organ building.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What did you learn from Fritz Noack? Can you say? Of course, you learned many things. But what was the most important, perhaps, thing for you back then that you learned from Fritz Noack?
The concept of the pipe organ as a highly integrated musical instrument. That it's not just a number of parts put together, but it's more like a harpsichord or a piano, where all the sum of all the mechanical things makes a musical instrument. Mm-hmm. And I think there wasn't a lot of organ building going on in the United States at that time where that concept was primary. Right. So he brought Fritz, and of course Charles Fisk had that idea too. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are early organs from Charles Fisk from that time that are highly unified in complete instruments, in an artistic sense, and that includes the architecture of the casework and the playing action as being really important to the success of the instrument, and the pipe design and scaling being a unified whole that makes the organ successful.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And of course, you studied with John Brombaugh, right? Later on, were your experiences with Fritz Noack and John Brombaugh different in any way, or of course they are great colleagues and fantastic masters of their trade, and maybe in a way they are a little bit related because they both are historically oriented organ builders. But did you learn something different from John than from Fritz?
By the time I went to John Brombaugh, I was very much not a learning person, but I was a part of the firm, and I already had my own ideas about organ building. And Fritz was like Baccarat, and if you look at the Baccarat organs at that time, Baccarat was strongly influenced by the Schnitger organs, especially Koppel and other organs like that. But if you look at a Baccarat organ, it was a modern mechanical thing. The tracker action and how the interior was built, and he used modern materials. And Fritz Noack also took that Baccarat way of building and used modern materials. He used plywood and aluminum parts and things like that. But when we got to John Brombaugh, John had this idea that we could back up and we could go back to a real historic way of building a pipe organ. So in 1972, we made an organ in Toledo, Ohio, at Ashland Avenue Baptist Church. And it was the first time we made an organ that had a completely historic aesthetic, all solid wood construction. The way we put the case together was like the old organs. The wind chests were made all with solid wood. We racked the pipes by burning the rack boards with the hot irons. We were interested in pipes that were made out of old alloy of high lead, and we hammered some of those pipes. We kept going back to Europe and looking at the European prototypes, and I think we were very successful at capturing the real spirit of the Schnitger organs at the time, and other organs that were even earlier than Schnitger.
And of course, John, 1970s was a time when America saw a great explosion of interest in historic and organ building, don't you think? For example, Gene Bidion's Opus 8 at Cornerstone Chapel in Lincoln, Nebraska. Do you remember this instrument was also built in around that time, 1977, I believe. Now it's in another place in St. Thomas Aquinas church in the same town. But it seemed to be this idea of historically minded building the instruments. The place was ready, right? The country was ready to. Organists, first of all, also were more or less ready to have those new or old ideas, right? And organ builders were ready, don't you think?
And I think we always said that when the Americans went to Europe and studied the old organs, we could see how they were made. And we always said, well, Flentrops restored this organ and that organ, but they didn't see. So they did a good job restoring the old organs, but when they made a new organ, they didn't capture that same spirit. Mm-hmm. But we as Americans, I think we were more open-minded, and so we accepted the real spirit of the historic organ building. And the other thing that was going on in America at that time, there was not only an explosion of historic practice in organ building, but in all types of music, in string instruments and harpsichord building and early music orchestras, and the New York Pro Musica was a very influential group. It was just, it was all over the place. So I think the organ builders really fit in with that. And there are also organists that went that at the end of the Second World War that ended up in Germany. They were in the military, and they were right there at the very earliest time in 1945 and 46, when there were many instruments that had not been restored. They could go out and see the authentic instruments, and they came back. The organists had a tremendous influence on us as organ builders. Mm-hmm. So that was the organ builders just can't go out and build the organ. Someone has to buy it and finance the organ, and there were organists who were very interested in that aesthetic of building. Mm-hmm. And I think in a lot of ways the Americans were pretty much ahead of the Europeans at that time as far as their assimilation of the historic style. Mm-hmm. Definitely. There was some work, like we always looked at Jürgen Ahren's work, and there were some of the early Arendt and Brunsuma organs, like the organ in Aurich, that had a good spirit of historic building, but other Arendt organs we didn't think captured that, like the Arendt organ at in Eugene at the University of Oregon, we always thought, well, Aaron could do great restoration work, and we went like to Leiden, to the Hochlanzekirche, where Aaron really, he didn't restore the Jahrhundertzwart organ, but he kind of recreated it, and that organ is fantastic. There Aaron took historic material and brought it back to life. He didn't have an advisor telling him exactly what to do, but he took the old pipes that still existed and the old parts that still existed. He essentially made a new organ, but all those old things inspired him to build an organ that was better than anything else.
That's completely true. I think Americans were well ahead of the entire world and basically leading the movement of historical organ building into the future, and organists were also a big part of that, right? They read old treatises in original languages, and of course scholars published facsimile editions, right, and made translations into English. It was a complex phenomenon, right, to basically which
like the republishing of Dombedos.
Yeah, true.
It's a big influence on us that we actually could have our hands on the full-size copy of Dombedos in reprint. That was a very wonderful thing for us, and we didn't build organs in that French style, but just we learned a lot about the technique of building organs from reading those books. Mm-hmm. And people like Fenner Douglas, who wrote a number of books on performance practice, we read those books and learned a lot about the performance practice of the earlier times. So it all went together. Mm-hmm. And we were so fortunate that when George Taylor and I started, we had some great opportunities as Taylor and Boody's. When we started in 1977, we had some great opportunities to build significant organs, and especially our Opus 9 at Holy Cross College in Worcester, Massachusetts. James David Christie had us build that organ, and it's a big room. It's like a European church. It has a brilliant acoustic, and we were able to build a big organ in this classical style. And I always hesitate to say Baroque because people associate Baroque organs with this kind of squeaky neo-Baroque sound. We never built a Baroque organ. We built another kind of organ. And I always say classical, but that was a big organ. It was 52 stops on 4 manuals. It was a real 16-foot organ, and highly unified in the design of the pipework and the alloys and how the reeds and the flues work together. And I always remember when there was a Boston Congress of the International Society of Organ Builders. So all the European organ builders came to Boston for that meeting, and they brought them to Worcester. And James David Christie demonstrated the organ. We played it. We pumped the organ by hand. And after that, they could see the organ, and we always said it was like when the sharks are tearing apart a body. It was a feeding frenzy. They all went crazy looking at the organ because they had never heard anything like that in Europe, except the old organs.
Right. So it must have been one of the oldest sounding instruments in America, right?
It still is.
Perhaps besides this fantastic instrument that you restored in Salem, right?
The Tannenberg.
Exactly, yeah. Tannenberg.
That's a whole different aesthetic in building, the David Tannenberg, because it's a particular Moravian organ, which has a very gentle sound. And the Holy Cross organ that we built in 1984 and finished in 1985, it's a very intense and has, I always say it has lots of core to it. The chorus has a very rich and dark sound, and unlike any other. But really powerful instrument.
And John, what were the most challenging thing for you back then when you were started working with George and basically at that period, what challenges you encountered, and maybe you overcome, of course, them, but it's interesting to remember those.
Well, we were building a workshop, and we started with nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very difficult thing to do because when you start building instruments, you need all the tools. So we had to put all these things together, and many of the things that we needed to know, there was no record. Like the alloys of the metal.
Right.
And we had some really fortunate experiences in Europe, and we met people like Koretzkis,
mm-hmm.
who was extremely knowledgeable and had done lots and lots of research. And George and I were able to help Koretzkis take the pipes out of the Schnitger organ in the Akerk in Groningen.
Mm-hmm.
When the church was in danger of collapsing because the ground under the church had subsided because of the change of the water table in Holland. The church was in danger of literally falling down. So they had put steel beams around all the columns of the church, but they still didn't know if it was stable. So we helped remove all the Schnitger pipes, the front pipes, all the inside pipes. We took all the wind chests, we took apart the playing action, and we helped put the organ in storage. We moved it across town to the Martini Church and put the organ in storage. So this was an invaluable thing for us to touch. You know, when you touch a pipe, you can learn a lot about it. Metal thickness and how the alloys feel. And we blew a lot of pipes by mouth as we were doing that. Not only Schnitger pipes, but there were pipes in that organ, in the Akerk organ, that were from Andreas de Maar, much older than Schnitger, because it was very common to reuse the old material in organ building. Mm-hmm. So that was an invaluable experience to just handle and examine those pipes. The other thing that was a great break for us is that we were given some pipes by Martin Vente, and Vente was another early researcher and a person who really appreciated the old organs, and Vente gave us some pipes from a really old organ from Niehoff, the organ in Schoonhoven, and we had that metal analyzed by spectrographic analysis, and so we learned at that time just what the impurities were in the old lead. So that was a great help to us, and we copied those alloys when we started making our own pipes.
John, at that time, did you cast the pipes on sand or on cloth?
We cast on cloth. We've never cast on sand.
Uh-huh.
I do see some reasons for doing it, and I went to see the Goart organ in Göteborg.
Yes.
Göteborg. And I saw what they were doing, and I participated in the casting of the metal there. But we have never done it. I think there are some reasons to try it, and I still would like to have some experience doing that, especially for the small pipes.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it would be a good thing to do for that.
Did you see, John, how Goart demonstrated sand casting techniques at Eastman School of Music Eroy Festival maybe some 15 years ago. Oh no, maybe 13 years ago. There were a number of organ builders from America present in one tent. I think they constructed a tent and they basically built a pipe from scratch. And I was there and witnessed. Were you there too, by chance?
No, I didn't go to that meeting. I was working on another organ at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But there were several people from our workshop who went to that meeting and participated with it. Participated in that demonstration, and I believe we helped make some parts for that casting table, and we did some work on preparing.
Right. This project, of course, was part of the I think Eastman's initiative, right, to reconstruct or even build a replica of the organ, which is originally in Vilnius, Lithuania, from 1976 by Adam Gottlob Kasparini, and they just recently finished it. And this church, Holy Ghost Church in Vilnius, has this fantastic late Baroque instrument. And in the year of 2000, International Society of Organ Builders held a congress, a meeting in Vilnius, Riga, and Tallinn, in all three Baltic states. And
I was there.
You were there?
Yes.
So we met John actually then. You might remember the concert at Vilnius University St. John's Church when I and my colleagues played this organ for the first time, and I played
the organ barely completed or not completed.
Yeah. I played E flat major Prelude and Fugue by Bach. I remember at that time. With that posaune pedal sounds were exploding in the bass. Yes, but we met, right? Fantastic. Now it's completely different story. Good times, but that was 16 years ago, right?
Yeah.
A lot of things have changed from that period. And John, I'm very interested to know about your current projects. Of course, what are you up to now?
Well, we built a big organ in New York City that is a 4-manual organ that's on Broadway, and for Grace Church. And in that organ, we made a departure from the European historic organ, and we looked more at the American classical tradition or the English cathedral organ tradition. And so we made a 4-manual organ there that has a grate and a swell and a choir and a solo as the 4 divisions, and 2 divisions under expression, the swell and the solo. And with many more strings in the organ and the reeds more characteristic of the English tradition. So that was a big departure from our North German roots, so to speak.
Yes.
But I think excuse me, you can apply the same technique for recreating that kind of organ that you do when you build, say, a Germanic organ of historic type. The same rules apply. You go and look at the originals. You see how the pipes are made. You copy a lot of the characteristics, and you look for the sound characteristic. And I think that that organ has been very, very successful, and it's a wonderful organ for the Episcopal Church music, and especially in the English tradition. and works really beautifully for playing the hymns and accompanying the church service, but also plays the English Victorian organ repertoire very, very well. Mm-hmm. So the Howells and the Stanford and all those composers just work really, really well. And I see that in America there's a big interest in returning to an organ of that style, and I think you can build a mechanical action organ that works very well in that style. And some of the best of the Hill and the Willis organs are mechanical action organs. They're not all electric action organs, but you can build mechanical action organs that address that tradition. So that's a very interesting way to turn, and I see there's a big interest in America now, and I see it also coming in Europe, that people want electric action organs again, that they feel like there's something that they can do with an electric action organ as far as control and crescendo, expression, and coupling at different pitches, and many, many other things that are more characteristic of the symphonic tradition of organ building. And so I think you'll see that there are more electric action organs that are going to be built. I see also an interesting trend is that the Europeans are interested in the American classical organ. And so we see now E.M. Skinner organs being moved from America to Germany and to Holland and other places in Europe where they want to experience this American classical tradition. So that's also a fascinating tradition, and there are a number of builders who are specializing in moving English organs, English Victorian organs, from England to Germany and to Holland. Mm-hmm. And so that's also a very fascinating tradition. The other big trend I see is a big interest in both America and Europe in the organs of Cavaillé-Coll.
Yes.
People are very interested in Cavaillé-Coll organs. And there's just been one completed in Ithaca, New York by Juget Sinclair, and you look at the console and it looks just like a Cavaillé-Coll organ. Mm-hmm. And I think that we, being historically oriented, that we'll end up building some organs in that style also. Mm-hmm. And we've already had the opportunity to go to France and do some study of a number of Cavaillé-Coll organs. So I think that you can apply again the same skills that we developed for building North German historic organs, and use those skills to interpret other types of historic organ building.
Yeah, once you learn the mindset, historically oriented organ building mindset, right? You look for certain things in other styles, right? In Cavaillé-Coll style, in English style, Central German style, even Italian style, right? You notice those things that perhaps not every organ builder is even aware of, right? What makes a, for example, English organ, so to say, tick or maybe work, right? But you, since you learn the craft of building historically oriented organs over 30 or even more years, right? You now have the tools to do what you want, basically.
And I think the pipe making is one of the most important things. If you have really highly trained pipe makers and you have your own pipe shop, then you have the sound of the organ in your hands. You can recreate any style of pipe and in any alloy, in any dimensions, and you can bring to life a new kind of sound out of those pipes. If you, unfortunately, there are many of the big European builders with a big reputation, but if you buy an organ from them, you're getting pipes from all kinds of factory pipe making operations. We hold the organ closely in our hands. Yes. And I think that's really important that you do that. We make all the reed pipes, we make all the flue pipes, we make the keyboards, we make the wind chests, we make the cases, we do the architecture of the organ. And if you keep all those things tightly in your workshop, and there are great European workshops that work that way. I mean, Bernard Obertan is a really good example of that. He has a very particular way of organ building. He doesn't copy anybody else, but if you buy an organ from him, it's a highly individual creation, and it's entirely made by hand in his workshop. And I think whether you love his organs or not, I think that's a very valid thing to promote.
Well, that's completely true, John. This factory-made approach can go only so far, right? After a while, those kinds of pipes are all the same, right? And if you put them in a good room, a reverberant room, maybe that might work. But other than that, it's not that interesting after a while, especially for organ builder, right? Who wants some new challenges every week or every day, right? And if you are so accustomed to building one style of pipes all the time, just like on the like a machine, right? It's no longer probably artistically pleasing for the builder, don't you think?
No, and it's difficult to get a really good sound out of those pipes, because if you buy from a factory that's making only pipes, what is their motivation? They want to make profit. Exactly. And they want to make these pipes as fast as possible. So they may look okay, but our pipes have the unevenness that only slow hand making can put to that. And the other thing that we do is we take a long time to voice the organ. When the organ is finished in the church, ready to make music, we take a long time to perfect the sound of the organ. And there are some successful builders that don't spend very much time at all, but we spend a lot of time. And we always think that that's what really makes the organs good, and the voicing gives the organ a particularly human characteristic, and that's we always say, the stamp of the builder.
John, do you believe in the idea that every pipe should be somewhat individually voiced, somewhat a little bit uneven, or they should fit into ensemble and be like a good choir, like blend, right? What is your take on this?
I think every pipe is an individual, and we do some going up and down the keyboard when we finish voicing to smooth out a little bit, but not too much, because I think that difference is what makes the sound of an organ interesting, and never too perfect. So the pipes have to have that individual character. Now, if you're building a Victorian English style organ, then you have to put more nicks in the pipes. Then you maybe make them a little more even, because that's the character of those instruments. So I think you need to look at the style of the instrument and listen to the historic examples. And if you're building in a particular historic style, you have to be willing to change how the pipes sound.
John, is it possible to take historically oriented organ building techniques and create something entirely new, 21st century basically, a very novel, out of those same tools and techniques? that would be sort of very forward-looking too.
Oh,
what do you think?
I suppose you could do that, but I've never tried to do that. There was a competition in Germany for a building of a new organ, and they were looking for new techniques and new directions. And I don't know if the project ever moved ahead, but we talked here in the workshop about interfacing the organ with the internet. So you could play the organ from the internet, even if no one's in the church. And so I think there's possibility of doing that. I don't know tonally if there's anything. I mean, the organ is so tied to tradition, and if you look at other musical instruments, they are too. Are you going to make a plastic violin, or are you going to make a glass violin? Are you going to change all the rules for what reason? Maybe I'm short-sighted, but I don't see a big reason to do that kind of thing. I mean, the acousticum organ is a good example of that kind of direction.
In Sweden, right?
Yeah, yeah. But now I hear that they want to sell it already.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't know. I guess it was Gerald Voll who developed that idea for building that organ, or who was involved with it?
I think Hans Ola Eriksson. Hans Ola.
Yeah.
Hans Ola Eriksson. But the reason I asked you this question, John, is, sometimes you go to those old instruments from the 17th century, right? And you play original repertoire, and it all sounds fantastic, right? But sometimes you experiment with some novel sounding music too on those instruments, and they might also sound a bit unusual, but still quite convincing. For example, in the year of 2000 in Gothenburg, Sweden, they got this organ academy where they inaugurated this new North German style organ in Örgryte New Church. And I remember witnessing a concert by Hans Davidsson, who played Volumina by Georgi Ligeti, basically avant-garde piece from the middle of the 20th century, on the 17th century style organ. Mechanical action, very flexible winding, every mean-tone temperament, right? And he had two assistants helping him to, and everything was done pumping bellows by foot, but the result was quite shockingly impressive, I would say too. So that's the reason I asked you about. Is it possible to take and experiment some new things with old techniques, old style too? Maybe there is more to the historically oriented organ building than the tradition, don't you think? Or I don't know.
Well, I think what Hans did was, I think that's certainly a direction worth exploring. And if you look at even the smallest of the historic organs, they're expressive. They're expressive because of the individuality of the voicing. They're expressive because, as you mentioned, the flexibility of the winding. They're expressive because of their tuning and temperament. The tuning systems, more so than an organ that's in, for example, equal temperament. So I think the boundaries are more open there, and I think there's more research that can be done in those boundaries. And I think we need to learn, for example, more about what a Gothic organ was really like. And recently there have been a number of portative organs that have been built with Gothic scaling, where the pipes do not progress very much, but they're narrow in the bass and large in the treble. The pipe scale is large in the treble. The cut-ups are fairly low, and the bellows has ability to take in a lot of air, so you can change the wind pressure, and I think Gothic organs were made that way. I always look at the picture of the bellows from Halberstadt, and the pumpers not only can, you see some of them are pulling up on the handle above the bellows, but some are pushing on the bottom of the handle. So I wonder if you could, at points of emphasis or crescendo in the music, that the pumpers could raise the wind pressure of the organ and cause the organ to get louder and louder. And with the portative, you can actually make the pipes overblow, so you can play in the octave harmonic or the first harmonic. You can play at the fifth. So there's all manner of things in even a small organ like that we don't know about, and we can push the boundaries to expand.
Fantastic. John, before we close our conversation, can you go back in time when you first started building organs, right? Do you remember one thing or two that you wish you knew back then that might have made a whole lot of difference for you? What would that be?
It was very difficult for us to be really efficient at what we did. We were very slow compared with, say, the European builders at the time, who had really efficient ways of doing things. And I think that it would have been much easier on us had we learned some of those techniques to make the work go faster.
Right.
And it was always difficult for us to charge enough money for our organ building so that we could be secure.
Yes.
And we always complained that we were always the biggest donor for the building of the organ. That it was hard on us, and so I think that was a big thing. And the other thing is that there were times when it was difficult for us to get good information out of good cooperation from the European builders. We American builders, I think we were always, it was amazing that among 5 or 6 or 10 American builders, we shared information all the time and freely. And the European builders never could understand that. We could call up Paul Fritz or John Brombaugh or Richardson Fowkes, or C.B. Fisk, and we got information that went among the shops. And I think that made us all a lot stronger. But there were times when we went to Europe and we just had a stone wall. We couldn't get into the organs. We couldn't go into the organ shops because I think the competition in Europe was a different kind of thing.
Well, I would say you're right, and it's just too bad that this way in Europe they do business, right? I think collaboration is the thing, not competition anymore. And I think the value of collective mind and collective mindset is much more valuable than any of the individual, right? So if you mention 6 or 5 organ builders collaborating, you will learn probably not 6 times more than if you did it by yourself, but tens of times more than usually, right?
And I see that. I think it's improved in Europe in the past years, and the projects like Hans Davidson at the North European Organ Project in Göteborg, I think that was a great thing for the European builders because there were 5 or 6 builders that worked together there, and I think they learned that was a great thing for them to exchange that information and collaborate in that project. So I see it's a lot better, and recently there've been American builders who have gone to Europe and collaborated on voicing and other technical parts of projects. So that collaboration even is reaching from America back into Europe now. I would like to see that organ experts, organ consultants in Europe would be willing to consider American builders as worthy competitors in some of these projects. And I know now that there's a project to recreate a Niehoff organ. And we built a Niehoff-style organ in 1984 at Holy Cross College, and I think it was a very successful instrument. But I don't see that there's any interest in asking us to collaborate or make proposals in Europe. And I think that the European organists are missing out on something, because I think we could offer a lot to the organ culture in Europe.
Exactly. And it would serve everyone in our profession so much in the future too. So, John, thank you so much for your time and generosity. And before we end our conversation, of course, our listeners would like to find out more about you and your work. Can you give us the link where they can click and find out more about your shop and what you're doing?
We have a website at taylorandboody.com, and we also have a Facebook page, Taylor and Boody. But if you just search us in Google, you can get all those links. So that's fairly easy. We have a fairly strong presence on the internet.
Great. I will include those links on the description of this podcast conversation too, so that people who will be listening from the website could literally click on the link too.
Well, thank you very much for asking me, and it's been fun to talk to you.
Thank you so much, John. I wish you amazing years ahead of you. Keep pushing the boundaries and keep building the new old instruments, or old new instruments, right, in a different way than you previously thought was possible. And I hope you will reach Opus 80 at least, or Opus whatever your milestone is. I hope you will reach it
one day at a time.
Right. Okay.
And nice to see you again, and I hope to see you soon in person.
Okay, many greetings to George too, and I hope he will be doing also much creative work this year too.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much. If you liked this conversation, I encourage you to visit my blog Secrets of Organ Playing at organduo.lt, where you will find lots of insights, practical advice, and training for every area of organ playing. You can subscribe to this blog for free to get your daily dose of inspiration and to be the first to know when any of my future podcasts roll out. I hope to help you reach your dreams in organ playing. I'm Vidas Plinkevicius. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you online really soon.